Alrighty, this video is going to be just a relatively quick one, and I want to kind of show you the workflow that I've been using for working with CAD and bringing that and setting that all up to be, well, just to have the end result be a game-ready object. So this bolt here was made in CAD. There was the traditional high poly, low poly workflow. So as you can see here, the high poly obviously had threads because I have baked them in. So we're going to go ahead and set up something very similar to this. So this is something I've actually already made before. It's what I'm using for my oil filter for the attachment in my plugin. We're basically just, all we're doing is we're making this guy here. So we're making the bolt. And as you can see in my version, I have some baking issues. Thankfully, they're on the inside and they're not going to be seen. I'm going to show you how to resolve those as well. Because again, this whole thing right here is actually made right inside of Fusion360 with a little bit of cleanup inside of Blender, and was completely retopologized inside of Moy 3D. So just minimal cleanup. So I'm going to show you how to do just the bolt. So this should hopefully be a quick one. I recorded this once already and ended up being 40 minutes. So let's try to pick up the pace on this. So basically what we want, find some reference images. A friend had referred me to yandex.com, which has been phenomenal. So once you find one image of what you're looking for, you can find a ton of related ones just immediately, and you get a lot. So this allows us here, I don't know if you can see them all that well because it's not the greatest image, but basically we have two thread types. We have the bolt with a slight chamfer. I don't know if I'm going to bother doing that. We have the outer threads here, which just goes into the oil filter. So those are 3/4 by 16. And we have the inner threads, which thread onto the muzzle, which is 1/2 by 28. So we want to mimic those threads, and we want to get this relatively close. So to begin, here in Fusion, we're just going to go ahead and create a sketch. Do it on any plane you want. I'm just going to do this bottom plane here. And we want to actually create the outer threads first. Or not the outer threads, but the outer cylinder that we can cut the threads onto. That's going to be kind of our basis for scale. So we know that that is going to be 3/4 of an inch. So what we do, click this center diameter circle, select the middle, and we know it's 3/4 of an inch, so that's going to be 0.75 of an inch. And there we go. Now you want to make sure this is not the radius. As you can see, this arrow here stretches all the way across from one side to the other. If it stretched from the middle to the outside, you would want to half whatever it is. So anyways, this is going to be the sketch that's going to contain all the information for the bolt itself. So I'm going to name it to bolt. Now I want to make the head. So to do that, we come up here to create. We're going to go to Polygon and hit Circumscribed Polygon. I almost misread that first word a bit. Select the middle. And here we can see this is roughly where it's going to be to match up. So as you can see, I'm actually, even though it says 11 millimeters, I am bigger than our circle here. That is 19.5. That's because it's using the radius. So 9.525 is going to be roughly the same radius as, actually it might be the exact, as this guy right here at 19.05. So I'm going to go to 12, and if I double that, I know that that's going to be at 24 millimeters. So it's going to be about there. So I press enter, and now I have a roughly a 24 millimeter, circle. Or not circle, but head. So if I were to grab a 22 millimeter socket, it should fit right on. So that's kind of roughly what you would use your real world baselines to follow. Okay. So now we want to set up and start extruding. So I'm going to hit finish sketch. And the way I'm pivoting around is I'm holding down left shift and middle mouse. If I let go of left shift and just use middle mouse, I can pan around. So this is not a full Fusion360 tutorial. There are plenty of other videos about it that are way better than mine. So I'm just going to click on this inner circle here, and I want to press E to extrude it, and I just want to extrude it up. So we're going to do somewhere along the lines of probably, I think 25 millimeters will be good because this head's going to take up about 5. So we just drag it on up. It's going to say new body. We just press OK. As you can see, our hex head down here is gone. So we can unhide that by clicking the little eyeball, whatever you call that. Clicking on the outer ring, as you can see, it only selects that part of the face. Press E to extrude. And we're just going to go up by 5 millimeters. Now, if for some reason this is all showing red, it looks incorrect and all that kind of stuff. If you look over here, it might say cut. In this case, I don't have a way to cut it because it's not intersecting at all. You want to make sure it's set to join. So we press OK. And now, as you can see, it joined the two together. They are now one single body. So we have our bolt, just with no threads. And that's realistically, that is what we want. So next up, we need the inner hole. So we want to cut these threads out, which are 1/2 by 26. So we know that the inner hole here is going to be a 1/2 inch. So we got to make that. So the way we do that is I'm going to do that in a separate sketch. I like having dedicated ones for my cutters. So click on Create Sketch. And if you can't select the pane that you want to make sure you're looking down, hold left click, and you can select whatever your mouse was going through. So in this case, I can select that face or X and Y. I want to select X and Y. And create my circle, just like before. And I want this one to be a 1/2 inch, so 0.5 inch. And press enter. We're going to hit finish sketch. Click on our circle. Press E and just extrude it right on up. And this is that red that I was talking about. And as you can see, it's set to cut. That's because it's a cutter. So you can see where it's wanting to cut out. So we just press OK. And we now have our hole. I'll be right back. I got a text. Alrighty. So let's see. Yeah, back to where we were. It's only been about a couple seconds. We want to, well, we can add a little bit of detail here. So if we look at this bolt here, it looks like we got a slight chamfer maybe around the edge. Or is that, let's see, what do we have? So we just kind of have it around the edges here. Nothing really fancy. Want to, we can do all that. We just, nothing real extreme. So it looks like they're very, very small edges. I don't know if I want to do that because I kind of want to keep them sharp. I think that'll be better visually. So we'll probably just leave that. And we'll focus on this inner chamfer and the cutting for the threads. So we're going to do the threads first. So the way we do that is we click on wherever we want the threads to be. So in this case, I want to do the outside, or if I want to do the inside, I just select it. So I click the outside, go to create, select thread, check modeled, and in our case we want it to be full length because obviously it goes the full length of the shaft, and we want to change this to standard. So currently we're on metric. We can go to unified screw threads. Here's where we have 3/4 by 10. We want to go to 3/4 by 16 and press OK. So that'll give us the correct threads that we need there. We select the inner, do the exact same thing, change it to standard, and we want 1/2 inch by 28, like so. And again, make sure we check modeled. Press OK, and there we have our threads. So now we want to add just kind of a slight chamfer. Now, here's the cool thing about the timeline. As you can see, if I want to chamfer this whole edge, it's, I would have to go through, select all these, and then I can select chamfer and just kind of see how it goes. It'd probably be fine. So that does okay. I'm not a huge fan of the result, but what we can do is simply drag this timeline before we cut the threads, or before we cut the inner. Then we can select the inner ring, like so, and we can add our chamfer. Whoops. Just like that. So I'm going to go 1 millimeter. That actually looks quite okay. So we'll leave it at 1 millimeter. Then we can just drag the thread back over it, like so. And as you can see, it's not cutting into the chamfer. So I want it to. So I want to just simply drag our chamfer right here over to the other side of the thread. As you can see, we have our chamfer and our threads now cut right into it. So it's become a part of it. And in my opinion, that looks good. That's kind of what I want. And if we want to tweak it, what we can do is we can change that from full length and instead go really just as far as we feel we, need it to go. So I can go slightly lower, press OK. Granted, that's going to give us the same result. Actually, I press Control Z, so that's part of the reason why. I can go a little bit lower like that, press OK, and we just get ever so slightly different results. So I'm just going to Control Z, go back to full length, and leave it like so. So this is, this is our high poly right here. So what we want to do is we want to export this out and then work on the low poly. So let's go ahead and export that out real quick. We're going to go to File, Export, change the type to Step, and save it where we need it. So I've already, like I said, I did this before, so I'm going to delete all these real quick and get started with fresh. Alrighty, so I'm going to name this one bolt_high and export. Then to make the low poly, select both the threads, right click, suppress the features, and do the exact same thing, just name it bolt_low and hit export. Now the naming in this case doesn't matter. I'm just doing it for the sake of cleanliness, so I'm going to open up the low in Moi 3D. So once I'm in here, I just go to save it as FBX, and I'm going to name this one bolt_low. And here I can change my settings. So if we want to see the poly count, you can see we're at 914. I just set it to triangles only so I can see it, or 414, sorry. And that's a little high for me. We don't need that much detail for something like this. So if I bump this up to 20 and look at it now, that's a lot more appropriate in my opinion. We're down to 270. I think it looks good. Let's check 25. And to me, that's going to be a little bit much because we're going to see a lot of these harsh edges. I think 20 should hide them quite nicely. So we're going to select back to Ingons. As you can see, that is much easier to work with inside of Blender. And just press OK. And that exports it out for us. Now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to hit open and open up our high poly. So the reason I do this is because I just want to lower it because it's a little excessive when you don't. So for what I mean by that, let me change it to triangles and press 0. So we are not doing anything. As you can see, this is 326,000 for the poly count, and that's just super dense. There's really no reason for it. And same thing, I've had some issues where I would export the high poly out as a triangulated mesh already from Moi 3D. And when I bring that into Blender, I noticed there was some issues with kind of how stuff was set up. So I want to change it back to Ingons. And let's lower this a bit. Let's go down to 3, and this is at 25,000. And that is nice and smooth. So obviously, the bigger the number, the less detail you get. So I want good threads, so I'm going to leave mine at 3 and press OK. Now let's go to Blender. I want to save this and bring in those two models. So we're going to import FBX, select both, and I'm going to scale them both up by 100. Okay, so let's see. This one here is the high poly, so this one's going to be the bolt_high import. This one here is the low poly, so we're going to do bolt_low import, just so we have the naming, we know which one's which. All right, I'll be right back. Someone just pulled in. Alrighty, I'm back. So the reason I'm doing this is because I want to have a separate, at least for the low poly and high poly before I export, because these are not triangulated. I want to have a separate mesh before I triangulate. And same thing goes, I want to do the unwrapping here just to make life easier for me so I can duplicate it, triangulate it, and export it right out. So we want to go ahead and actually unwrap this. But first, we want to also apply everything we have. So I'm going to select both, press Control A, and hit all transforms. As you can see, that did both. Let me turn on screencast keys real quick. There we go. Okay, so once we've done that, we can go ahead and unwrap the low poly. So we're going to go over here to UV editing. And look at it. So one of the things that we can go ahead and do, well, let's actually try to unwrap it first. This is the result that we get. Oops. Let me enable stretching. This is kind of like it's auto, I think it's auto unwrap kind of setup, but we want to do this manually because we can clean this up a lot. We don't need to have all these curves. It's just ugly. So what I'm going to do is normally, I don't know why it didn't come with them, but normally they're marked the edges are marked as sharp. And just to be safe, we want to do that again anyways. So I'm going to go to Edge Select for this layout, and we can select all around the edges. However, when I Alt-click, normally it's supposed to select the whole ring. But you can see if I click on one of these vertices, there's actually two here. So that tells us that we need to press A, press F3, and we're going to do Merge by Distance. As you can see, that right there broke the shading. So if we click on Sharp Edges, now it's actually showing our sharp edges. So they were kind of being hidden by the overlapping or the overlaying faces, I think. So now when I move them around, as you can see, everything is fine. So, because normally you would end up getting it would export this out as sharp for us. Well, with all the edges marked sharp that we need for us roughly. So back into UV editing, what I'm going to do is I want to show you a little shortcut. So if we click on one of these sharp edges, we can go to Select, and Sharpness, and that selects all the edges that are marked sharp. Then we can right click and just hit Mark Seam. And that'll give us a decent result. We obviously have some stretching here and stretching here, and those are for the inner and the outer cylinder because they don't have any seams. But I want to fix this issue up first. So I'm going to click this little arrow so we can see them both without having to click on anything. I am not a fan of how that has broken this up into little pieces, and that's because they have a seam everywhere. So I'm going to click on pretty much every single one except for one like that, and simply clear the seam. And then when I unwrap, as you can see, it is now all in a straight line right here. So that's great. Now we got to fix this issue up. So if I click L here, you can see it's the entire inside. I'm just going to select where they're linked up together like this and mark it as a seam. I'm going to do the exact same thing right here on the other side and mark it as a seam. And unwrap, and now we are good to go. Now we just want to kind of, help the UV space because we have a lot of wasted space here. With this plugin, if I hit Update Stats, we're only using 35% of the area. So if I want, I can go to UV Packer. This is a free plugin. Go ahead and Google it, and it'll just take you right. Just look for UV Packer Blender, and you can change the padding to 3, and change the type to high quality, and hit Pack. And that's the result it gives us. So let's compare. So we have 35. Now we have ever so slightly more, but we also have a lot more free space. So it's kind of compacted it. Now this did not do a very good job for whatever reason. I don't know why. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this again. So the reason for I'm doing that is because when I press L, as you can see, it's selecting other edges as well. If I unclick it, and then press A over here to select all. Yep, sorry, I got interrupted. But the reason for that is now, when I select it, I only moved that around. They're not linked together really in any way. So here, I can drag it inside. Yeah, I'm going to go inside of that one. I don't know if this one will fit. Might be a better option. No, I do not trust that. So I'm going to move this inside of there. And then I want to take these all and kind of move them over here to the side. So I'm going to select, move this guy down, and select. I'm using the L key to select them all. And now I can just scale them up. So let's see. Which one is that going to be in for? That should be for this top guy. So realistically, we don't need that much detail there. Let's see. That ring is going to be for what? Okay, so that ring, this guy right here corresponds to this inner side. This top corresponds to here. So these are areas that we really don't actually need much UV space wasted. They don't do much. They're not going to be really visual. So I can select this guy. This is one I want to scale up a little bit more. And I'll move it over. So from here, let's see. These are the halves. So my guess is, yep, that is going to be this outer edge right here. Again, not all that important. So we can just take it. I'm going to move this one over here as well. And that gives us a little bit more space. So what I'm going to try to do is kind of expand these up a bit. So this is going to be the outer threads here, Or is that going to be the, no, that's going to be the inner threads. So right here, and this row is going to be the outer threads. So I'm just going to kind of scale these up however I can, while still making them fit. Something probably along the lines of that. And then these are going to be the inner threads, and make them take up a little more space, something like this. Okay, now I can select, and I'm just going to move it over, make it a tighter fit. I'm going to select these two, move them down, and I'm just going to scale them up. Like so. Take up a little more space, select this guy, and do kind of the same thing. Just like so. So they take up more space. So now when I hit update stats, I'm using 50% of the UV island space as opposed to the previous 30, I think it was like 35. So we're taking up a lot more space, just a lot better. And that's what we want. So now I want to set this up, and I want to triangulate the high and low poly just in case. So I'm going to rename this collection to before triangulate. Then I'm going to duplicate this collection and just name it export. Then I want to rename these to just have the suffix of underscore high and underscore low, and hide the before triangulate. So let's work with the low poly first. I'm going to go to edit mode, press A to select all, and Control T to triangulate, and look at the job that it did. And that's honestly probably what I would have done roughly manually. So that we are good there. Let's just go and make sure there's no real glaring shading problems. And in my opinion, this looks just fine. We're going to do the same thing to the high poly. Press A, Control T to triangulate. Make sure there's no real problems. I am not seeing any. That's dense enough of a mesh where we shouldn't have any anyways. And now we're ready to export. So we're going to click on the low, File, Export, FBX, and I'm going to create a new section and call it Baking. Let's go there, and this one's going to be bolt underscore low. Now I want to change these settings here. I make a preset, but we're going to do selected objects, mesh, scroll down to geometry, change smoothing to face, and uncheck bake animation, even though it's not going to do anything in this case. So now we can hit export, and we're going to do the exact same thing to the high poly, except we're going to name it underscore low, we're going to name it underscore high, and hit export. Once that's done, let's head over to Marmoset, and we're going to get our bake set up. So we're going to click on New Bake Project. We're going to use the quick loader, hit load, and select both the high and the low, just like so. So now when I hit the H to go to the high poly, we can see we have the high poly. Go back to the low poly, we have the low poly. So now we can try to bake this and see kind of the results that we get. So the first thing we want to do as well, hit P. Actually, we do have a material set up, so we're just going to hit P. Let's set up the baker path first, actually. So baking, I want to change mine to Targa and call it T underscore bolt bake. And hit P to set up the preview. So this is just with only the normals. So I want to actually select the ambient occlusion as well, because I want to bake that, and press bake. Now press P one more time. So just so it adds the ambient occlusion to it. So as you can see, all it's done is it's taken the map that we have, and it's applied the normal map and the occlusion. So this doesn't look horrible. The outside threads do. And the way we can actually resolve that normally is just uncheck sharp cage and bake it again, and you will see the result drastically cleans up. It follows the shape of the threads much better. The only problem is it has kind of messed up these inside threads even more. You can see it's not really hitting correctly. Like it's almost as if the cage is too far in. So we got to fix that. And same thing, we can also kind of increase it a little bit. I'm going to go to 16x, and I'm going to leave it at 2048 by 2048. And I'm going to go ahead and do one more quick bake, like so. And now I'm going to go to our bolt. I'm going to click on the low, and here you can see we have our cage. So I'm going to click on paint offset, and I want to, did not mean to draw, paint this inside here to be pushed out. So to go out, I want to make sure this is at white. If it's black, as you can see, it's sucking it in, but if it's white, it pushes it out. So we make sure it's white, and we want to go somewhere on here. So we see that when I draw, we're on this inside, we're on those threads right there. Wish I could make this full screen. So that's how we want to draw it. So we want to get right along the edge the best we can. I'm just doing this to create kind of a buffer. Make sure I don't hit anything else. Okay, just about. And what, I got Parkinson's or something? There we go. So now I want to do the inside. So I can bump up the size a good bit without really having to worry about keeping my borders tight. And there we go. So we have that all set up. So now I'm going to go back to the bake project and hit bake once more and see the result. Okay, so as you can see, that cleaned up all those marks. We now have a surprisingly good bake. We do have a little bit of the same problem down here. We might be able to fix that in the same manner. I don't know if it's worth doing or not, but let's just see. We're just going to do a quick one. Actually, no, I don't want to do that. So let's find it. Okay, so we know that should be this whole bottom. Yep, so what I can do is I can just simply spam it, kind of like that, because that's all I'm really going to be painting against, like so, and hit bake. Okay, so we have the same result. That tells us that it is not important, because it clearly is not doing anything. So, just going to do one final bake, and we now have our maps. Okay, so now that we have that, I'm just going to do a quick little texture project. I'm going to do that in a new scene. So I'm going to import the mesh just below, add a new texture project, drag and drop the material to link it, and select our normal and our occlusion, and drop a simple fill layer on top of that, just so we can see roughly what it looks like. Okay, so this is pretty much what our bolt would look like. So we have very good, in my opinion anyways, baked threads on there. So that is the workflow for, not sure why I have another Blender project open, but that is the workflow from from Fusion to Moi360 to Blender, and then to whatever texture software you want to use. So as you can see here, here's our low poly that we received from it. We're only at 232 triangles. We have a pretty good amount of details still on it. And if this was a really small bolt, we could drop that down to well under 100 and still have a good amount of detail that we would get from our bake. So that's the main thing. And we have that very easily and very nicely set up, just simply through features that we're able to hide and unhide that make our life just drastically easier. So that is the CAD workflow to game asset. Hopefully that kind of taught you something, or made it so it kind of was able to understand it a little bit more. But it is very powerful. It is what I have been using for pretty much everything hard surface for the past couple months. I have not even bothered to touch Blender half the time unless it's for something quick like a simple table, because it has just been much quicker. And same thing, when you export out from Moi3D, it shades it for you, like it provides its own shading information. So if I click down here, we go to geometry data. As you can see, it gives their own normal data. So that's why we can't change any of this, because it has its own data already on it. The only thing we can do is clear it. That allows us to change it. kind of however we wish. However, this mesh is just so dense, I don't think it even matters. Anyways, that is going to be all for this video. Hopefully you learned something, and as always, I will see you in the next one.